Hey there folk, welcome back. So for today's video, I want to discuss second generations of doll brands. So think brands like Bratz, like Monster High, like Ever After High, where they definitely have these very clear-cut eras, and as a fandom, we generally refer to them as generations, especially when it comes to Monster High. Like there are a lot of doll brands that have like these very, again, clear-cut little segments of time where their designs are quite different. But I was thinking about Generation 2s because you could certainly argue that Rainbow High is currently in their second generation. I know that most of the community doesn't use that term for where Rainbow High is at. Like, we call it all sorts of different things: the reboot, the rebrand, the relaunch. I haven't heard that one nearly as much. Soft reboot, soft rebrand. Like, there are a lot of terms floating around, and there's not like a dictionary definition of what exactly defines a second generation of dolls. But in my head, I think you can certainly say that Rainbow High is in a second generation of sorts of its dolls. And so that's what got me thinking, because I was thinking about how they're not really as great as they were in their heyday. And then I was thinking about second generations in general, and why do they all suck? I do want to say right after making that statement that this does specifically apply to like doll generations. Other toys and other like media franchises or anything like that, I can't speak to. I don't have any expertise there. I don't even have any expertise in the doll world. I just talk about it a lot. But like specifically within the like mainstream doll world, it really truly feels like second generations of these big brands are just the worst. And so I want to know why. I think that's a pretty natural question to ask after having a realization like that. Like, why are G2s almost always just the worst version that you can get of a doll? I know that that's a little dramatic, but listen, the widely held community belief for most of these is that these G2s are the worst iteration. So I think it's fair for me to say that. And I think I have some ideas. So for this video, I would like to go through those ideas. We're going to be exploring 4 different brands that have a second generation. So Monster High, Ever After High, Bratz, and then Rainbow High, and sort of discuss the differences between each generation and why I think G2 is the worst, in an attempt to answer the question, why is it that it feels like G2s are just always doomed to fail? Now, of course, these are just my theories, my opinions. You might completely disagree, and that's fine, because at the end of the day, I'm talking about plastic, and it's not that big a deal. But I would still love to hear your opinions on my theories in the comments down below, or if you find yourself like coming up with other theories as I talk, absolutely would love to know what you're thinking about. And also, if you find yourself enjoying the video, if you could like, hype, and subscribe, that is super duper helpful to me. But without further ado, we can jump on in, because I do have a feeling I'm going to ramble a bit this video, and we're going to start with what I think is perhaps the most quintessential example of not only a generational doll line, but also a really iffy G2 with Monster High. For today's doll of the week, we're going to be discussing Barbie's Goddess of the Arctic, because she was supposed to be Monday's video. If you didn't see my community post, she was supposed to be the video that went out Monday. But the audio was, I don't even know what happened. It was genuinely unsalvageable. So I did make a short form video to like highlight her a little bit, but since she got robbed of her long form content, she gets to be doll of the week this week. Really quick little side tangent, because I just thought about it and I'm bad at planning these things. The reason that brands like Barbie, for example, are not included in our little examination today, even though Barbie has been around for ages, much longer than any of the other brands that we'll be discussing, is mainly because while I do think that you can sort of find eras of Barbie, like the 2000s are certainly quite different from where she's at today. And I mean, the original 1959 Barbie looks nothing like Barbies do today, realistically speaking. But I do feel as though her transformation was slower, I guess you could say. Like, I don't think that she necessarily has such definitive endings and beginnings as the other generations that we will be discussing today, and as the other brands that we'll be discussing today. The other key thing with her is that with the examples that I'm talking about, the ones that have gotten a G3, a third iteration, have always taken a break between G2 and G3. They have not been producing continuously, whereas to my knowledge, Barbie has always been producing some sort of doll continuously, whether it's good or bad, one like quote unquote generation or another. Barbie just keeps chugging along. So I do think there are just a few things that make Barbie not really fit into the category. I just felt like that was important to say, because Barbie's obviously an enormous brand. So That's why she's not being included. Anyway, on to Monster High. So taking a look at over here, we'll have Wave 1 Frankie from Generation 1 of Monster High. We have to cover what made them special to begin with. First of all, it's just the fact of them being monsters. I've said this before on the channel. Absolutely, there have been other, like, quote unquote creepy dolls, some of which are genuinely significantly creepier and more gothic than Monster High. So I don't want to say that Monster High is like the first one to ever do this. However, they were the first brand for this to be a mainstream thing. Before Monster High, you could not just walk into a random Walmart and like find these creepy cute dolls that were being mass marketed for kids. That just was not a widespread situation. But then Monster High hit, and it's just that's it. Like, that's the end of the story, right? Like, everything changed, it feels like, after Monster High started production. These dolls really did blend that creepy cute. Like, they were certainly a lot edgier than anything else that, again, was on the very, very mainstream market, but they were also cute enough for kids to still be, like, appealed by them. That's not even close to the right language, but you know what I was trying to say. They're not really scary enough for children to, like, be frightened by them broadly. I'm sure some kids were, but I'm sure some kids are also afraid of Barbie. So, like, broadly speaking, not really super frightening. Yes, some parents got in a tizzy, but some parents are going to get in a tizzy over literally anything. So we're just sort of discounting that. Point is, they were really, really a unique brand, a very, very special brand. They're a character focused brand, which is, I feel like, sort of impossible not to be with such a concept like that. Like, I feel like you have to have it be pretty character based. And they were really, really solid. I will say, y'all know if you've been here before, I'm not a G1 purist, okay? I do think that Generation 1 had its faults, and sometimes those faults were in the quality of clothing or even just the quality of the dolls themselves. Some of them broke quite easily. G1 dolls are famous for like their glue heads, and sometimes the dolls were just in mini dresses, very, very simple, not exciting, not necessarily like insanely high quality mini dresses, okay? I just feel like I have to make that disclaimer that I'm not saying they were always perfect. But that being said, they were decent quality clothing for these dolls at the time. They would have multiple layers to their clothing. You would frequently see real chains on like bags or even on the actual fashions themselves, which is not so common necessarily today on a playline level doll. They had really, really unique and really interesting fashions. Point is I think it is extremely easy to see why Generation 1 became so popular. Even if you yourself are not a Monster High fan, like, that's fine. I think it's something that you can recognize, being like, I understand why other people like these, even if you don't necessarily like them for yourself. But we wouldn't be including them in this video if everything just stayed perfect the whole time, because there was a G2 of Monster High. There was a reboot, which means that at some point there was a problem with Generation 1. And really, ultimately, it was a lot of problems. I've talked about this before on the channel. Tons of other people have talked about this before. So I'm going to kind of just like bullet point it and be quite brief with this. But problem number one was just Mattel's greedy. Sorry, that is exactly what it is. Monster High was consistently making a profit even as it continued on through the years, even though it become an established brand. It wasn't new. They were sort of flooding the market with dolls and sort of overwhelming people. Even under those circumstances, the company was still, or the brand was still making a profit, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't the same margin that they had been seeing before. And the margin was, sort of getting smaller to my understanding. And so that's a red flag for a company that wants the impossible expectation of every single year your profit margins are bigger, which is it's just frankly not possible, but that's what companies want anyway. So there's that. That's problem number one. Problem number two, Monster High is made by Mattel. Mattel also owns Barbie. And around like 2015-ish, I mean, it was happening significantly before that, but Barbie had been on a decline for a little bit. We'll put it that way. And around 2015-ish, it seems like things were getting grim. Barbie herself seemed to be having like a little bit of a struggle with identity, and her sales were definitely down very far from like her prime or her multiple primes that she's had throughout the years. Like, Barbie just was not selling the way that Barbie needed to be selling. And then there was also the matter of Disney and Ever After High and everything, which this is also going to tie into Ever After High, but Mattel did have the Disney license for a good chunk of time. After all of this went down, the license went to Hasbro, and now Mattel does have the Disney license again, but there was a period where they were not making Disney dolls. That's mostly because Mattel was producing Ever After High, which is about the daughters and sons and children of fairy tale creatures and fairy tale like characters. I couldn't think of the right word for a second there, which is very, very similar, not only to the fact that like Disney does have, even though technically speaking, things like Cinderella and Snow White are in the public domain, a good monopoly on like princess and fairy tale just in general. Like Disney is the name that you tend to associate with that. And they also were making Descendants, which was like the same concept, except it was specifically Disney characters, children. So you can see where the conflict of interest is there. And so for those reasons, and I'm sure a bunch of other stuff like behind the scenes that I just don't know as much about, Disney pulled their license from Mattel, and so Mattel lost the Disney license, which did lose them a good chunk of change because they could no longer legally produce Disney dolls. So anything that was like revenue coming in from their Disney dolls wasn't a thing anymore. So they were like, let's change Monster High. I personally do feel like that's a silly, goofy way to go about things, but that's not my business. And also, I'm not in business. I'm not in economics, and I don't know anything about the behind the scenes of all that jazz. But the point is, with all of this, like, stuff going on with Mattel being really just in sort of a precarious position when it comes to their doll brands specifically, they decided Monster High needed a revamp, and we got Generation 2. Now, I am going to make like a bold assertion here, especially at the time. Like, I think looking back, hindsight is 2020, we have a little bit more thought processes going on about why G2 was received so poorly and why it came to such a bitter, pathetic end. But at the time, especially, and even now, you'll see this as like a contributing factor. A lot of people cited that the dolls got too cute. And it is true that if you look at the G2 head versus the G1 head, or even just the entire doll, G2 looks very different than G1 of Monster High. And you definitely can argue that it is less like sharp, less dark, less creepy. I don't think that that's the main problem with G2. To be perfectly honest, I think that if the other problems that I'm going to be pointing out were fixed, they would have like continued on at least a little bit longer. And like, I think eventually the hate over the faces would have faded just because people are going to come in and out of the hobby, especially when it's like something that is designed for kids. Like, some kids are going to grow up, new kids are going to grow into the age range where they like these dolls. Like, I do think the cute factor was a factor. Please don't get me wrong. I think that for the group of people who were already Monster High fans, seeing their dolls overnight shift into like significantly more sweet looking versions of the characters that they had known and loved. Like, yes, that was a shock. Yes, I'm sure a lot of people were extremely upset about it. I was upset about it at the time. Like, I was not happy about the G2 change, but I really genuinely don't believe that that is like the main thing that caused the generation to fail so spectacularly. I actually think it's two things. And these two things do form the hypothesis of why, in general, I think G2s don't work as well. The first is simply that people don't like change. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I actually despise change to an extreme degree. It's kind of funny because I feel like I handle change better when it comes to like dolls. Like, I can ride a reboot out and be like, okay, well, I can give this a chance. But like, if you change my schedule, don't speak to me. Don't even look at me. I'm furious. Like, so that's not me saying that from a place of judgment. That's not me saying that from like a high horse of I'm better than you because I can handle change. That's not it at all. It's just the fact that humans don't like change. Like, that's the natural human psyche. Like, some people are obviously better at handling change than others, but change presents risk. Change represents the unknown to a certain extent. And so generally speaking, humans don't like it. And so I think it's fair to say that a decent chunk of the problem with G2 of Monster High was not only that they changed to be cuter, but that they changed at all. If Monster High had rebranded entirely in the opposite direction and been like, hey, we actually don't want to make these dolls be for kids anymore, and we're going to go like Living Dead dolls route, we're going to go super creepy with it, they also would have lost a large chunk of their fan base that way. I think it's just like change is going to alienate some people. It's going to upset some people. That's just a fact of life. Problem two, the budget. Admittedly, like when G2 first came out, you could see it. You could definitely already see that the dolls just didn't look quite as high quality, quite as intricate and detailed and all that jazz. But it only got so much worse as the generation went on until we were getting lovely examples like this. And that's how G2 died because who who would want that if you're used to like what we used to be getting from G1? Like, of course, collectors were bailing. Of course, kids were being like, yeah, I'm not as interested in this anymore. The quality just became so abysmal that that's really what I think killed G2. I think if they had been cute but extremely high quality, they could have lasted longer. But you can't change from creepy cute to cuter and then also take all the quality away and expect your customer base to remain. So that's sort of what happened with G2. Yes, there's a G3. We're not going to be getting there quite yet. I want to go over all the G1 and G2s of the brands we have to discuss today, and then we'll get into the G3s. But yeah, I think that Mattel just was seeing that Monster High was not making as much profit, and then they had all the other problems going on. They just didn't sink as much quality into the brand. And so, it died for a little bit. G2 died. But then we kind of have to immediately follow up with Ever After High because they are pretty intrinsically linked. Ever After High, in addition to being about the children of fairy tale characters, was also a companion series to Monster High. Like they were linked for on like a lore basis, like they canonically are linked. And so of course when Monster High is sort of going down, you're going to see Ever After High going down as well. And then again with Mattel losing money and everything during that era, it basically is like the same reasons. It just presented a little bit differently with Ever After High. Ever After High, all of the good things that I had to say about Monster High like can definitely apply to their first generation. And honestly, also now that I'm thinking about it, I think Ever After High is a lot like Rainbow High. Like I don't really think that people called them second generations, but I'm calling them that because I don't really care what label you put on it. It's like the second iteration. Point is, though, first iteration, very high quality clothes, super unique designs. Not everyone loved them, but that's going to be the case with everything. They were really fun, character based, cool concept, all of that jazz. Amazing media, too. Ever After High genuinely has some of the best doll media I have ever seen. But the G2, the reboot, the rebrand, it started out soft, a little bit less noticeable, I would say, than Monster Highs, just because if you're going again from like the creepy cute to much cuter, it's a little bit more jarring. Ever After Highs changes were signaled with a face mold change. They ended up re-releasing several of the dolls in like the exact same outfit, it seems, maybe a little bit lower quality. I haven't held all of them in my hands, so I can't like speak to that. I'm just looking at pictures for this, but like very, very similar designs to their original designs, except the face mold had changed. The eyes were a little bit different, and now they had like an open, smiling mouth. I don't think that's nearly as traumatic a change as the Monster High shift, and also I don't think it's a terrible change. Like Ever After High dolls were definitely much sweeter than Monster High, so the smile wasn't completely out of place, but it still was change. And as we said, change like sort of makes people nervous, but Ever After High especially, like if it was just they changed the face mold, I think that they could have been fine. But they also lost like a lot of the quality. And so they also perished and they did not end up getting a G3. I don't think they're ever going to get a G3. Every once in a while, I'll see people in the comments of my videos or like other posts being like, oh, I hope Ever After High comes back. And I always feel so terrible when it's my comments because I feel like I'm obligated to respond and be like, hey, like, I don't mean to be mean, but I personally wouldn't get your hopes up. Mattel just recently, I mean, it's been like at least a year at this point, but Mattel got the Disney license back. They don't want to piss off Disney. There's absolutely no way they are going to risk rebooting Ever After High and doing all that when they have the Disney license back. Like, I just do not see it happening. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I will be so thrilled if I'm incorrect because I do really, really love After Ever High. That was Ever After High. There we go. But I don't think they're coming back. I don't think there's going to be a G3 of Ever After High. So that's sort of where their story ends, with different faces, change, and poor quality. But those are the Mattel examples. So you can kind of see, especially with those two, because as I said, they're so linked together, why they sort of failed in similar fashions. Where the pattern becomes interesting is when you flip it to MGA brands. So first, we're going to take a look at Bratz. And I do want to say, I understand that, like, this one is a little bit more nuanced because if you want to be technical about it, you could say that Bratz had a couple of different iterations. Like, to my mind, if you wanted to, you could argue that they're on like their fourth generation now, but I'm not going to count that. The reason I say that is because you have the original Bratz, the like ones that most people tend to think of, the ones that people have nostalgia for, like the ones that are really secondhand expensive. That was a terrible way to put it. I cannot talk today. The ones that are really expensive on the secondhand market. And then in 2013, they made a slight shift, or like a shift of a couple inches, and they put the Bratz on taller bodies because the normal Bratz, like the original Bratz, are significantly shorter than other fashion dolls. Like if you put them like a Barbie and a Bratz together, it's actually crazy how short they are. And so they ended up putting them on taller bodies for a couple of years to try to like bridge that gap, to try to make them a similar height to Barbie. But with that being said, I just don't see people online talking about that as though it was literally an entire separate generation. That could be just the places that I am. That could just be that I'm not hearing this talk. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm sorry about that. But when people talk about the tall brats bodies, that's how I hear them referred to. I don't hear the term reboot, rebrand, generation, anything even close to that when I've heard people talk about the tall brats bodies. And I honestly think that like the first generation that I'm defining for brats could be likened a lot to Barbie's entire existence, where there are subtle changes. Like as you go through, you can definitely see that like the style of the screenings is changing a little bit, and they got the taller bodies, which was definitely a little bit more of a jump, but they still maintained a semi-consistent style. Like the style shifted, but it felt more like it was shifting with the era that the world was in versus the era that Bratz was in, if that makes sense. Like it didn't feel as though Bratz themselves were sort of just like changing for no reason. Bratz are fashion dolls that do, generally speaking, I think reflect some of the trends and styles that are popular at the given moment. And so the Bratz dolls from like 2002 definitely look different from the Bratz dolls from 2013, stylistically speaking. But I think that that change felt more gradual, and it felt more like them just like maintaining relevancy and continuing to put out clothing that was currently popular versus a brand shift. Again, I am sorry if you disagree with that because it does sort of derail this if you think that the tall brats count as a second iteration or second generation of brats. Sort of just discount everything else I'm going to say. But it just seems like most people don't think of them that way. Namely, because in 2015, we got a much more proper reboot, and Bratz really shifted their entire look. But real quick, let's back it up to my generation one that I'm classifying of Bratz and discuss what was going on with them. So, admittedly, I was a child when all of this was going down. And I also have only really recently gotten super duper into Bratz. So I might be a bit murky on the details. And also, there's a lot of lawsuits involved in this. And frankly, I know everyone thinks this is so interesting. I don't care. I don't care literally at all about the lawsuits between Mattel and MGA, except for how it affected the dolls. And even then, I'm just like, it happened. It's in the past. I don't know. Like, so I'm sort of just, again, being rather brief. For me, rather brief. We'll put it that way. I don't know how long I've been talking. So maybe it's not actually that brief. Anyway, though. Bratz comes out in 2001 and is pretty immediately, it feels like, pretty popular. Like within a couple years, they went from releasing like, one or two lines per year to just flooding the shelves, like release after release after release, and hit after hit after hit. These dolls are amazing. There is a reason these are so expensive on the secondhand market. And absolutely, some of it is just people being ridiculous. Like a lot of secondhand markets are extremely overinflated for no genuinely good reason. But part of it is just because people love Bratz dolls. Like people were so drawn to these and found them so fun. The fashions were really interesting and very, very current. At that time, I do think that Barbie had other great things going for them, and some of her fashions were pretty relevant to the times. But like Bratz was on the nose, it feels like, when it comes to the Y2K fashion of the era. Like it just felt like they were so immediately appealing to kids, especially kids who were a little bit on the older side. Like maybe you're starting to age out of Barbie. Not to say that there is an age for any sort of doll. I'm using, like, I don't know, the speak that I imagine is spoken in meetings. That's so dumb. I'm talking about target demographics, we'll put it that way. Maybe you're aging out of Barbie and like the soft pastel princess palettes, but like you're not quite old enough to not be interested in dolls at all. So maybe Bratz become more your thing because they just feel a little bit more, again, current, like a little bit less fantastical and soft and princessy, and a little bit more not edgy exactly. Like some of their releases were, but some of them were also perfectly soft. Like Bratz had their own princess line. They had the Ooh La La line. Those feel like quite soft lines in my opinion, but they just felt more, I guess, realistic perhaps. Even like the dolls from Barbie that were set in like the real world, you know, not like Swan Lake Barbie, but even Barbies that were just, yeah, this is Barbie walking her dog. Personally speaking, different people are definitely going to feel different ways. Personally speaking, I always saw Barbie as like separate, separate from myself. She was just like a fun character to like look up to, I guess might be a good way to put it. Whereas Bratz sort of felt maybe more aspirational, like, oh, I could become Bratz. It does help that Bratz was like, at least for a good chunk of the run, always rooted in reality. Like, yeah, they had fashion pixies like later down the line, but at first it was just like, yeah, these are just girls. Like, these are just girls going about their business, having fun. Whereas Barbie had that fantasy element, so maybe that's what made her feel a little more fantastical. This is not relevant. What am I doing? Point is, there was just something about Bratz that felt very like tangible, very of the times, very current, and very fun about it. So Bratz became really, really super duper popular, and Barbie didn't like that. That's like the short version of the story. Some lawsuits flew around. You can watch more in-depth videos from people who like care about all of the details if you want to see all of that jazz. There are tons of them on the internet. But lawsuits flew. Barbie was like, hey, fashion dolls are our thing. You can't do that. And Bratz was like, fashion dolls is a vague concept. You can't copyright that shit. It went back and forth. At one point, Barbie did like win very briefly a suit, and they got the rights to create Bratz. And so if you go look, you can actually find prototype Mattel Bratz. I keep saying Barbie. Technically, it's Mattel. You guys know what I'm talking about. But yeah, like they were prototyping and like they were conceptualizing Mattel versions of Bratz. They had also, at one point made My Scene to directly compete with Bratz to sort of be the Barbie version of Bratz, and that's like a whole separate can of worms. Then MGA eventually won like a countersuit or whatever the technical term for it is. They got the rights to Bratz back. Point is, it was tumultuous. It was rough out there for Bratz. And as much as I did sort of defend that I think I can loop generation one into one generation, even within that one generation, you can see the quality start to go down just a little bit in terms of what all is included and how many pieces are included and all of that. Like, you can see a definitive shift, not to the extreme of like Monster High Gen 1 versus G2, which is another reason that I don't feel like it's worth like separating anything, but you could definitely see that like it wasn't quite the same as Bratz in their prime because MGA is spending all their money on lawsuit. They're in court. Like, they don't have any money to spend on the dolls anymore, which is funny because we're sort of potentially seeing something similar happening because they just lost another lawsuit over LOL OMG last year. I think it was last year. Anyway, again, irrelevant. I'm really sorry. I'm going off on so many tangents. I'm just like, it's fascinating. So I think that the lawsuits and MGA's monetary loss from the lawsuits is a big reason that Bratz ended up needing sort of an overhaul. I also think just because they had such a tumultuous first generation, like such an inconsistent first generation. I mean, like I said, there was a point in time where MGA could not make any more Bratz because for a very, very brief window, Mattel held that license. Like, they weren't allowed to make Bratz. And so I do think it sort of makes sense to be like, okay, we're low on funds. We finally won all of our rights back and we're finally secure in our rights. Now we need to like kind of overhaul the brand because it's just been in a weird place. I can sort of understand where they were coming from. And yet the 2015 reboot wasn't super, I would say. I definitely don't think that the 2015 second generation of Bratz, the 2015 reboot, is nearly as reviled by Bratz fans as G2 is of Monster High. I always feel terrible talking about G2 because it is hated so horrendously within the Monster High community. I actually do think there are some decent dolls that came out of G2. Not as many as G1 or G3, but there were some decent ones. But it's like, people hate G2 of Monster High. Definitely Bratz fans, at least again in my experience online, don't like the 2015 dolls as much as they like the originals in general. but it doesn't seem like they receive quite the same degree of hatred, which I do think is quite fascinating. But the other interesting thing is that even though this is not Mattel anymore, you can see a lot of similar things happening with Bratz as you see with Monster High and with Ever After High, where you can see it feels like perhaps the pieces just aren't the same quality. Not terrible, not terrible right off the bat. Like this is the picture I have on screen is going to be, I think, the first line from the 2015 Bratz. I think this is the Chloe from the first line that they made. If not, it was like a early line in the 2015 reboot. And it definitely isn't like she's the worst thing ever, you know? Her clothing might not look as high quality as some of the other Bratz fashions that we had gotten before, but it's also not completely abysmal quality. The doll also looks definitely cuter. The head, I think, maybe is a little bit bigger. I've never held a 2015 Bratz in my hands, though, so like I can't say that from personal experience, but it looks a little bit bigger. The facial proportions are also very different. Most of, at least like the most iconic Bratz screenings from Generation 1 of Bratz. It feels so weird to refer to Bratz in generations because that's not like a common term, but I'm using it for the video. But most of them, Bratz has had so many different screenings, so many different screening styles. But I would say like the lips take up the most amount of space on the Bratz, and like the lips are one of their most iconic little images. There was literally a lip phone. Lips and Bratz are synonymous. And so sometimes you would have eyes that were about as big as the lips, but like it always felt quite balanced. And sometimes the lips would be bigger than the eyes. But with the 2015 Bratz, like the eyes are enormous. They're huge. They're very much competing with the lips. So that's like different stylistically. Generally speaking, I'm getting off on another tangent. I hope y'all are having fun because I can't stop myself. I'm like, just don't say it. I can't. I can't stop myself. When it comes to art and drawing, the general rule is if you want to make a character look cuter, you make the head bigger and you make the eyes bigger because like smaller eyes just in our brains doesn't scratch the same itch. It's because babies have bigger eyes. When compared to like the rest of their proportions, like a baby's head compared to its body is huge. I don't know if you guys have seen the videos. Like I can go like this and my arms don't even come close to touching the top of my head. If you take an infant and you pull their arms up over their head, it's like this because their heads are enormous and their eyes are also very large proportionally. And so the theory, I believe, I don't know if it's been confirmed. I'm on a tangent. I'm not doing science right now. But like the theory is that things with big eyes remind us of babies, and there is like an instinctive response to try to like take care of and find babies cute. Doesn't work for everyone. I'm not like a huge fan of babies myself, but it's like supposed to be this biological response that makes you look at it and go, oh, this is like a tiny helpless precious thing, I need to take care of it. And so it elicits like a sort of similar response when you're designing characters. So if you want your characters to be cute, make them have bigger eyes and bigger heads. Anyway. God, I'm the worst. So with 2015 Bratz, they do look a little bit cuter in the face because of that. The feet, interestingly enough, I think got even bigger. Like Bratz already have big feet, but they got like big and chunky, which I personally really love. I love a big chunky foot. I think it's fun stylistically. And I do think that it was a good choice because it balances out the enormous head, but it does still lend itself to a more cutesy looking style. Like that one, I don't have any science. I don't have any like tangent about it, but it just feels like when you've got like these big chunky feet, it can either be like big stomper boots threatening or that's precious. And it kind of went more in the that's precious sort of realm, especially because the vibes just felt different. And that could have been the era. Funnily enough, all of these that we've discussed so far were happening sort of around the same time. Like you have like I don't want to say downfall, God, that's so dramatic, but the decline of Monster and Ever After High into the mid 2010s. And then in 2016 was the Monster High Generation 2 launch. I don't actually know exactly when the Ever After High one was. Sorry, I'm not prepared for this. In 2015 is when Bratz had their reboot. So this is all happening around the same time. And so it could have just been that that era was a weird era stylistically. Not my favorite. Just in general, like the mid 2010s, I think was a crazy era for design, like emojis and galaxy print, and it was weird. It was a weird time period. That doesn't mean bad. You know, there are things that I look back on fondly, but maybe that had some contributing factor to all this. which is funny because that means that Bratz were to some degree trying to retain their relevancy, but I just don't think it worked. I think with them, Monster and Ever After High, I definitely think quality was like the main factor. I think that was like the biggest thing. But with Bratz, I think quality had something to do with it, but I also think it was just the change. Like, I do think it was just, it didn't fit anymore. And especially because, like I said earlier, Bratz sort of felt like something that maybe was like a little bit more appealing to kids of a slightly older age than things like Barbie could have been. Again, I'm generalizing, blah, 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 blah. You already know. But now with the 2015 reboot, it did feel as though they were sort of catering to a slightly younger audience, which, in all fairness, it is something that I think that toy companies in general have had to do more and more over the years as technology becomes more and more prevalent in children's lives because kids just aren't playing with toys in the same way that they used to. We are not going on that rant, Rain. You have got to chill out. Okay, I managed to avoid that one. But yeah, point is like I can understand why in 2015 Bratz might have been like, we need to pivot to a slightly younger audience, just because I do think that that has been a bit of a trend. And also, because that's a trend, and perhaps for other reasons as well, it does feel like younger kids might be a more guaranteed audience for toys versus like sort of a tween age child that might be more of a gamble. And so if they're coming off the back of all of these lawsuits, maybe they wanted to make a toy that they were like aiming at a slightly younger demographic that would therefore, in theory, be more likely to sell. But it just didn't necessarily resonate the same way with older Bratz fans. Again, there definitely are still some people who still really love the 2015 reboot, and it doesn't seem to be as viscerally hated as G2 of Monster High. But I can understand why, if you're like, oh my god, Bratz finally got their IP back, they finally are done with court, they finally like can just do whatever they want with the brand, and then they come out with that after you've had things like Pretty and Punk and Life in Concert and Rock Angels. I can see Winter Wonderland. I can see why that might rub you the wrong way. And so I think personally, I think that the change and the direction of the change was for Bratz a bigger factor than the quality. So that's a slight difference between like the Mattel and MGA. But isn't it funny how they sort of like are so similar? Am I crazy for seeing that? I don't know. We do have one more brand to talk about though, and it's another MGA brand, so maybe that'll help balance the scales out. And that's Rainbow High, the thing that started this whole video concept. So I do feel the need to make another caveat with Rainbow High because, like, you could, I suppose, argue that because it, technically speaking, originated as the Poopsie Slime Surprise and then went into, oh, I'm gonna forget what the dolls were. There were like some quite large dolls that technically like were the predecessors, there we go, predecessors of Rainbow High. They were not Rainbow High branded, and so I'm not counting that. That's my decision. That's what I'm going with. So if you look at generation 1 of Rainbow High, they're like fun to look at in a way because it's really cool to look at wave 1 of Rainbow High and watch them evolve and just sort of get like better over time. They had really, really intensely detailed clothing, excellent articulation. They got more and more diverse as time went on. They had good hair fibers, inset eyes. Like, there was so much going on with Rainbow High that was absolutely excellent. And then we got the reboot. This was back in 2024. Now, like the very, very beginning of 2024 was when the Rainbow High reboot started. And wow, what a reboot it was. The initial relaunch of the brand was like the same core characters for the most part, minus Poppy, RIP, my orange queen. But the key thing was that they started to become gimmick focused dolls. The first wave was, fashion dolls, but they also had a slime gimmick. And since then, they just keep going with the gimmicks on and on and on and on, some significantly better than others. But I actually don't think since that moment there has been a regular playline release of Rainbow High that has not been gimmick focused. Collector dolls, which I think actually has only been the Shadow High collector dolls. I could be wrong though. And then budget dolls don't count to me because those are like different brackets. When it comes to just a playline doll, I genuinely don't think that since the reboot Rainbow High has done anything that didn't involve gimmicks, which wasn't great. We also saw that we lost some of the articulation. Most famously, the wrist articulation was lost for all dolls, and then the thigh rotation, like they used to have a joint at the top of their thigh so that you could rotate the leg for more posability. Those were gone. Not to be seen again, really, unless you include the Shadow Eye collector dolls that came out in 2025. But generally speaking, that was all gone. Thankfully, we did retain the good hair fiber. They did not go to like using polypropylene. Thank you. Small mercies. But like the clothes also started to be a little bit less quality, just like not quite as great. And then, of course, there was the gimmick aspect, and things have, it feels like it bounced up and down, I suppose you could say. On the one hand, you have some dolls that are losing even more articulation. There are now dolls that don't have, mind you, playline dolls, not budget dolls, that don't have elbow or knee articulation on them. There are definitely clothing pieces that are out and out horrific, including plastic skirts. We're getting plastic skirts from the fashion brand now. But on the other hand, you have things like these Sparkle and Shine dolls, especially Wave 2. I know a lot of people are loving Wave 2 of Sparkle and Shine, and I also like a couple of those dolls quite a lot. They still have a gimmick with the like sparkle or the lava lamp legs, depending on which wave you're talking about, but the clothing feels like it's higher quality, and the character designs in general are at least quite interesting with those. So like they've kind of been all over the place with Generation 2 of Rainbow High, but it hasn't been received well, at least by adult collectors. This one is very interesting because I personally cannot pinpoint like a clear reason why Rainbow High would have pivoted other than they had to have just been too expensive. I do have to rant. Sorry, I have to go on another tangent, but I do think that this one, they've all been semi relevant, but I do think this one is super relevant because during Generation 1 of Rainbow High, what you saw was the prices were going up and the things you were getting in the box were going way down. When Rainbow High started out, again, just to reiterate, you had full articulation, like really excellent articulation for a mainstream fashion doll. The inset eyes, which some people don't like stylistically, but I imagine have to be more expensive to produce, so I'm accounting for that. Really nice hair. They also have big heads, so it does take more hair to root them than like a Barbie doll. Like they probably have 2 or 3 times the hair of a Barbie doll just because their heads are absolutely enormous. Unbelievably high quality clothes, and every like mainline doll or like deluxe line doll either came with 2 outfits or just like an insanely detailed outfit. But I think most of them were 2 outfits. Like it was routine that you would get 2 excellent outfits with a playline doll of Rainbow High. And originally they were like 25 bucks, which was, it was marvelous. It was wonderful. It was a great time to be a doll collector for sure. But then you started seeing the price go higher and higher and higher and higher. You were getting like, dolls that realistically were on the same level as the Wave 1 core dolls, but they were 40, 50, $60. Like I think the I'm trying to remember how much the like Rainbow Vision dolls were. They were like $50 somewhere in there. They might have been a little bit more, a little bit less, but those dolls were like $50. And again, you got the doll, same level of quality. You got the same accessories realistically, but why is the price higher? And then as time went on, more things changed. You saw us lose second outfits. So with like the main like lineups where you would get 5 dolls and it was like new characters, generally it would be a full rainbow. You went from getting 2 outfits with those to only getting 1 outfit. So then getting 2 outfits became more of a deluxe doll thing, but they were still asking the same amount of money for these dolls. So like you could see that they were struggling. And that's what I think was really what caused the Rainbow High reboot. I just think that they sort of set themselves up for failure by making the dolls so incredible and so detailed to begin with for the price point, because then that's what people expected. Reasonably so, that was the expectation set by the brand. And I just don't think they could maintain it, especially just given the fact that it's been tumultuous. Like those dolls came out in 2020, which is probably not a great time for them to have ended up launching. Like obviously, I imagine things were in the works long before that, but just because of the pandemic, like I imagine that was sort of difficult. And then things have been, yeah. Ever since, it's been a little bit of a wild ride. And so I think that maybe that was not helping the situation. But that's like the only thing I can pinpoint. I really genuinely can't think of another reason why Rainbow High would have had to reboot, except for the fact that they just like could not produce the dolls that their current audience wanted for the price that their current audience wanted, but they didn't want to like abandon the brand entirely. And so I think they just shifted, did something quite similar to Bratz, where they went for a younger audience. Although, of course, now in the modern area in the modern era, I think it's even more justified because now more than ever, children are not playing with toys the way they used to. Children are playing with screens. Again, I cannot I cannot get on that tangent. We cannot talk about this. But like, so I can understand why it's like, okay, we have to pivot towards a younger audience because we have the adult collectors, but like, the tween to teens are not really necessarily buying dolls and buying toys in general the way that they might have in a different time period. So I can understand it, but I don't love it. This is yet another case where I'm just hammering home that the change is not fun. Of course not. Like, you're seeing this thing that a lot of us really genuinely loved and like had a lot of passion for switch up quite suddenly, especially with the inclusion of the gimmicks. Like, a lot of adult collectors do not want to be messing around with gimmicks. Some of us love it. That's great. But like not all of us. And also it can depend on the gimmick. Like, some of the gimmicks I've been more for, some I've been significantly less for. I also think that I probably should have said this way earlier, but like, I routinely get comments being like, well, they are for kids, so like, why are you critiquing them? Companies know that adults, like, there are statistics out there that adult collectors account for like 25 to 30% of toy sales, I think it is. So that's irrelevant. Like, that's an enormous chunk that is like adult collectors. So I do think that it's perfectly fair for me me to critique it. So you can understand why adult collectors might have not been thrilled with the reboot, that inherent change. That being said, I think it's fair to like give it a shot to see how it goes, to see what's happening there. But then the second problem comes in, which is quality, which again I know I've discussed before, but really truly Bratz is the only example where I can say the quality dipped, but like, I don't think it was to disastrous levels. Again, at least right off the bat, I'm sure they had some flops that were like real rough. But like, it could have been way worse, and Rainbow High have showed us that consistently. Again, we have seen plastic skirts from a brand where we used to get two outfits of intricately detailed clothing. Plastic skirts and resin. We hate to see that. But I really truly do think that that was the much worse factor. I think that if things had shifted and had to become a little bit more of a cutesy aesthetic, but the quality remained, Rainbow High would be getting a lot less criticism. Case in point, again, is the Sparkle and Shine dolls. We'll just go with Wave 2 because those are like the more recent release. People still aren't thrilled with the gimmick of the legs. Some people like it. I personally like it because it bubbles and it's like a little lava lamp and goes woo, and my brain is entertained by that. But I can understand why other people don't, and I also don't like it on some levels because in order to achieve that gimmick, hi baby, hi, my sweetie girl. In order to achieve that gimmick, you do have to give up the knee joint, and then also you can't really like ignore the gimmick. It's literally their legs. So whenever you're redressing or restyling them, you sort of have to take that into account. You can't just get rid of the fact that they have lava lamp legs. But even though we are seeing that they are, like, from a fashion doll perspective, lower quality in that regard, and they are certainly very gimmicky, the designs have people enamored. The designs have people, myself included, comparing them to Heyday Rainbow High, where they just feel more cared about. Like, yes, there is the gimmick factor for sure. Yes, like, some pieces are like sewn together, so maybe it's not the highest quality, but the characters look interesting. They look reasonably well thought out. They look fun. The fashions that they do have, while some of them are like not as quality, some of them look to be really, really nice quality. And so it's just like this weird balance. And I think if more of their dolls could be in that weird balance, they wouldn't be getting the same level of criticism. But you get that, and then you get the other slop they feed us. And it's just hard to know what was that my voice just did. I hated that. It's hard to know where Rainbow High is going. With Bratz, I sort of did gloss over this because, again, we're going to be talking about the G3s in a moment. You did see them come back again. Rainbow High obviously hasn't gotten to that point because they haven't stopped producing dolls. Like they're still very much in the middle of G2, but it's interesting to think about whether or not they will be a brand that ends up making a comeback someday after G2 ends, just because it's like it's so hard to see where they are. It's hard to picture if they could have that lasting power to end up having a generation 3, or even if they're going to even out this weird wobble of quality that they're giving us, and they're going to end up lasting for a significant period of time right now before generation 2 ever ends. Maybe their generation 2 is actually going to end on a bang and this is going to be kind of a moot point in 3 years. I don't know. That's not the point. But as we can see here, throughout all of these examples, I dread to think how long this is. The two big things are the change. It's always going to be jarring to people. So that one I do think is like a little bit more forgiving, but the direction of the change does matter too. And sometimes we're just changing in the wrong direction. And the quality. The quality is the big one. I think that is just so hard for people to forgive. I think especially in cases like Monster High, it was so bad that it's like, don't ever give us that again. But some of these brands have managed to come back. Again, we talked earlier about why Ever After High I don't think is coming back. That's sort of an outside force. That has nothing really to do with Ever After High itself. And so I'm not counting that against them, I guess is a good way to put it. Now, Monster High did come back with G3, and it has had mixed reviews. Very, very much so, even to this day. Quite frankly, when G3 came out, it was like a bloodbath with people who were like, G1 will always be better, always superior. This sucks. Why did you even bother rebooting it? And people who are like, oh my God, yay, Monster High's back. I really, truly thought that shit would level out over time. No. No, it has not. No, to this day, it's like this huge debate, and it's absolutely pointless. Both like generations have things that are good. Both generations have things that are bad. That's it. Like that's the end of the sentence. You don't have to pick one over the other. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can like both. And I think it's absolutely bizarre that the community is so divided, especially given the fact that Monster High is supposed to be about inclusivity. End rant. That's not, again, it's not like necessarily that, I guess it's sort of relevant, but I didn't have to get that heated about it. Point is that Generation 3 has been extremely contentious. However, it has also certainly found success in a way that G2 simply did not. I'm going to call someone out real quick, not by name. I'm not that mean, but I did get a comment recently where someone was like, yeah, well, G3 is like flopping horrifically. Hi, baby. Give me just 1 second. My husband just walked down, but I have to finish this thought or else I'm going to lose it. Someone commented and they were like, yeah, well, G3 is like selling absolutely terribly and everyone hates them and like they're a commercial flop. And it's like, you can hate it. You don't have to like it. It's subjective. Like, that's fine. But to say that they're failing is like objectively untrue. They've been going on for years now. It looks like they're doing well. Like, we keep getting leaks for more and more and more of these dolls. Like, people are buying them even if you don't like them. So clearly, even though G3 has been contentious, it has been successful on some level. As if this video could not get any more chaotic, I am almost certain that my camera cut out there for a second, and so like, a little bit of that would have been audio only. But also, my lovely husband brought me a snack because I've been filming for so long. I have chocolate milk, and then I have buttered toast with like sugared apples on it, like sugar cinnamon apples. I'm gonna cry. I love that man so much. We just celebrated being together for 10 years. Best 10 years ever. Anyway, oof. Let's let's not get emotional. I'm supposed to be talking about dolls. Point is, G3 has certainly had controversy, but has also certainly had success. So the question then becomes, why is it different than G2? Because again, one of the main criticisms for G3 is how cute they are. People do not like that these dolls are a little bit more on the cuter side compared to Generation 1. So like, that seems in line with G2, seems in line with them doing poorly. But they're definitely not doing poorly in the same way that G2 did. Like, they're selling, again, they seem to be selling well. There are certain people who genuinely love them. And it's not like a fandom-wide disappointment the same way that, like, G2 feels like it was. Like, G2 feels like everyone basically, even people who, like, could find something to like about the dolls, were like, oh, this is not the same Monster High as before. And neither is G3, but it doesn't feel like the same level. Sorry, I couldn't resist anymore. It was like right in front of my face and I needed some chocolate milk. But I think personally, the reason for that is because there was a little bit of sort of break time. There was a little bit of time for Monster High to not be producing any dolls, for Mattel to like maybe recover financially in some capacity, and for them to breathe and decide where they wanted to go with the brand. And I think that's really the key thing, not only because it gives the company time to figure things out, but I also think it gives people time to yearn. Because while people do not like change, they also hate things disappearing, just as a general rule. And so I think what happened with Monster High was people loved G1. And then G2 just really didn't work out for all the reasons we discussed before. And then we had a couple years' time where Monster High wasn't producing anything, and we had no inkling that they were ever going to produce anything again. For all intents and purposes, for the doll community, it was a dead brand. It was a brand that was never going to make anything new ever again. And so if you loved Monster High dolls, you had to content yourself with all the things that had come before. And then they came out with another generation of dolls. There were also G1 style collector dolls that predated the G3 dolls, but like, I'm really trying to mainly talk playline here because Lord knows I have already complicated this video more than enough. This is going to be an absolute nightmare to edit, and I'm sure perhaps not a nightmare to watch. I certainly hope not a nightmare to watch, but a trip to watch. But I think that those couple of years are so crucial because it gives people time for like the blow of the brand ending and the blow of G2 lowering the quality so far into the ground to sort of heal up and soften a little bit. And it gives time for a little bit of that nostalgia to start to grow, and like the yearning for this brand that might have meant so much when we were younger. For like some people who are having kids, like they might be looking at it like, wow, I really wish my kids could grow up and experience Monster High. And then suddenly, boom, here it is. That can be a thing that actually ends up happening. And so I think that little break is very key. You can definitely have some of that nostalgia starting to build up in Generation 2, especially as it gets really bad and you can sort of see the writings on the wall and this brand is going to die soon. But I think those couple years where there's like nothing happening with the brand is the reason that G3 could succeed at all. Because I think that if G3 had come right off the back of G2, it just would have felt like another change, another thing that like wasn't necessarily asked for. And I just don't think it would have landed the same way. I think those couple of years make the key difference. And you will note that all of the G2s that we've discussed, Monster High, Ever After High, Bratz, and Rainbow High, the G2s all come immediately after the Generation 1s. Oh, hi! Oh my goodness! It's a, oh honey! She got scared. I also have to hurry up because like I don't want to eat this on camera. I feel like that'd be really gross and like the audio would be really weird. This is not a mukbang channel, but I want to eat it. It smells really good. Anyway, the only other brand that has had a G3 of sorts, you could say, is Bratz. So we look at them, and spoiler alert, we're going to see a very similar pattern as we saw with Monster High, where we had the reboot in 2015, and then I want to say 2018 was the last time they made Bratz dolls. They did like some collector dolls that were a collaboration in 2018, and then 2019 and 2020, I believe, were just like dark when it comes to dolls. I think they might have done like some other stuff, like maybe some clothing collabs or something like that. But when it comes to dolls, there were also a couple years where Bratz was not making any dolls. When they came back, it also interestingly follows a sort of similar format to Monster High, where Monster High came out with these Collectors, the Pennywise and Grady Twins collector dolls, before they then released a Playline reboot, where Bratz didn't do the exact same thing. I mean, I guess you could argue that like I think it was Hayden Williams collector dolls in 2018 were sort of similar, but then they had their break, and then they came back with reproductions of the original like first wave Bratz dolls, and then they did a couple of other reproductions, and they started doing some new stuff. They did also have collector dolls that were more of a midline price range with Cult Gaia and Moa Lola. I don't know, to be fair, exactly the time frame in which that is. I don't know if those all predate Bratz G3 proper, but this is sort of basically like the vague evolution, because then we get G3 of Bratz, which is where they start releasing new dolls that are like still the original characters, still very clearly Bratz, but that are not reproductions and are also not collector level. These are playline dolls that are brand new designs we've never seen before. So stuff like Always Bratz going out, Scorchin was like last year. It has amped up. Like they started out kind of trickling these in, but they definitely have pivoted more towards new things versus reproductions, it seems. Last year, especially, feels like it was a big year for new Bratz lines. And so now it feels like they're decently solidly into G3, where I don't know if they are still doing reproductions. It's sort of up in the air about that, but they are definitely making brand new concepts, but it still feels like Bratz. This one is interesting because I do think it's slightly different than G3 because G3 is very, very different to G1. Like it or hate it, it is definitely very, very different. Whereas I do think that like 2025 Bratz and like 2005 Bratz, they're not entirely dissimilar, but the shift has really been, like all along, Bratz following along with what is currently happening in the world. When it was like Y2K fashion is what's popular, that's what Bratz was putting out. As it became like the 2010s and fashion changed, Bratz changed right along with them. Now it sort of feels like G3 of Bratz is basically if you transplanted G1 into the 2020s, which is essentially exactly what has happened. You know, again, they had like the reproductions to sort of help ease them in, but now new lines that they're coming out with really and truly, at least in my opinion, do feel like the classic Bratz. Like they are giving classic Bratz vibes, but in the modern era to make them relevant. They are not just doing reproductions. They are not just trying to capitalize off of nostalgia, although I do think that is still a very, very intense driving force, but they are keeping themselves relevant by making things that are new and by making things that feel like they fit a little bit more into the current world. And so again, I think those couple years where Bratz wasn't producing anything were so essential to them being able to come back and come back well. They were like, okay, this is what made us good. Let's adjust it for the modern age. Reese, no, please be careful. She's scratching over there. I really have to stop filming. I'm so sorry. We are almost done. But yeah, like they took everything good about Bratz, and it feels like they were just like, how do we adapt this to the modern age? Now that we've had these couple of years to rest and breathe, and now that some of the nostalgia has had time to build up because we aren't producing anything, and it's going real good for them. Let me tell you, it feels like it is going very, very well. Perhaps their bigger success could be attributed to the fact that they are a little bit more in line with their original dolls, whereas again, G3 certainly more different and people don't like change. But I really do think that just like making these newer dolls, G3, Monster High, and Bratz both, where they are higher quality dolls, you can argue whether it's like the same level of qualities before or not. I don't have time to get into that. I really hate involving myself in like the G1, G3 discourse because it just pissed me off. But like, certainly not as low quality as their G2s. And they have that nostalgia that is like sort of drawing people in. And they also, like, to a certain degree, feel relevant to the current era. I definitely think like Bratz is a little bit better about being on the pulse of what's popular than G3 of Monster High. But they have all these factors going for them that are helping them continue on and be at least moderately successful as Generation 3s, whereas their G2s failed. And then Ever After High obviously can't come back, and Rainbow High remains to be determined. Maybe they're going to figure it out, maybe they aren't. But I think that's why G2 sucks. If you want me to sum the whole video in one sentence, which I guess I could have done instead of recording for an hour, yeah, people don't like change. So generations are always going to feel a little bit iffy because a different generation of a doll inherently means change for that doll, and human beings don't like that. And also, for various reasons, it feels like a second generation almost always comes off the back of the dolls losing a little bit of funding and being a little bit lower quality because of that. And of course, people don't like that. I mean, you combine the two, it does just seem like a bit of a recipe for disaster because you're basically handing over a plate and being like, hey, you want these like reheated cheap nachos that we altered of the thing that you used to love? And I feel like it makes sense why G2s don't seem to do too well. But I'm finally done. I hope this was interesting for you guys. I have been wanting to make this video for like a hot minute. Just other things kept popping up, and so I kept having to push it back and push it back and push it back. So I'm really excited to finally have gotten all of that off my chest. There was a lot more than I expected, but I had a ton of fun filming today. I hope you guys had a ton of fun as well, despite the fact that it was a little weird, a little bit of a chaotic one. Please let me know your thoughts on my theory. And again, if you have any other like ideas on what could contribute to Generation 2s being worse, leave them in the comments. Or if you think I'm flat out wrong and you think that G2s are not kind of universally in doll world the worst, let me know. I'm very, very curious to hear your perspectives, but that's going to be it for me for today. I'm going to eat this delicious little treat that I have. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day or your night, or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.